Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to our first live stream of the year 2025. I'm Carolyn Bradfield with Pathroot, and this is one of our series of conversations that we have with people that can elevate our understanding of recovery, elevate our understanding of what options are out there in the marketplace. And we're really fortunate today to tackle a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. And that's, what do you do when you have a student who wants to go to college, is in recovery, and you're concerned about navigating that world? So our special guest today is Blake Schneider. He's coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia, and is the program director for Kennesaw State University's Center for Youth and Addiction and Recovery program. That's one of the more mature and long-lasting programs in the country. And so we're going to be chatting today about what is collegiate recovery, who's eligible for it, how does it help, and just anything that you might want to know about that particular type of service. So Blake, welcome. And what I'd love to do is get you to share a little bit about yourself and then a little bit about Kennesaw State and their program.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. As stated, my name is Blake Schneider. I'm the director of the Center for Young Adult Addiction and Recovery. A little bit of background about myself. I identify as an individual in long-term recovery. For me, that means I've not found it necessary to take a drink or a drug or a mood-altering substance since January 26, 2011. I found recovery at the age of 19. A little bit of my story and how it relates to my work. I was pursuing a degree at the University of Alabama. I made it halfway through my sophomore year until I kind of crashed and burned and returned home back to Atlanta, where I was born and raised, and sought out treatment. In treatment, I told them that I wanted to go back to school and continue to pursue my degree, and they were like, "That's a bad idea. Do not do that." And being the hard-headed individual that I am, I went right back to school with no support, no safety net, just jumped right back in. And the first year upon my return to school was it was fairly difficult, right? It was interesting because I was a student and I had that scholar aspect in the classroom, and then I had my recovery, but that was really off campus, and there were two separate worlds. And I thought that I was the only student on a college campus who was in recovery. And then in 2012, the program started at Alabama. Some people suggested that I join. I was very weary and I was like, no, thank you. And they're like, we'll give you a scholarship for being in recovery. At which point I was like, cool, sign me up. I'm in. I'm excited to be a part of this program. So that was my entrance into collegiate recovery. Upon graduating, I moved to Starkville, Mississippi, and started the program at Mississippi State. And then in 2021, an opportunity arose for me to return back home and assume the role of director here at Kennesaw State University. Was certainly a really big honor and something that I still carry with me, knowing that it is one of the longest standing and most mature programs in the nation. Um, and just kind of for reference and context of explaining our program, when I started the program at Mississippi State and when I was a student at Alabama, you always heard about Kennesaw State. You're always like, oh, they're doing this or they're doing that, or have you asked them about this or that? And so I became really close with the folks who work here over the years. So it truly was a homecoming party when I returned. But a little bit about the Center for Young Adult Addiction Recovery. We have three functional areas, those being our recovery support services, our education and prevention, and our research arm of things. The one of which is probably most pertinent to this conversation and most relatable from a context of other programs that there are nationwide is our recovery support services. And so that's our peer-to-peer recovery meetings, that's our seminars, recovery coaching, recovery-informed academic advising, scholarships, all of the bells and whistles and everything in between. And I know that we'll dig into some of that, but most succinctly stated is really combining college and recovery so that students can still have that college experience and be in recovery, protect their recovery, have that safety net, feel safe and supported on a college campus, and not have to sacrifice their education or their recovery, but be able to achieve both simultaneously. So that's a little bit about me and about my journey and how I've arrived at SciR and a little snapshot of the work that we do.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. That's nice for people to hear that you were able to bounce back from what happened at Alabama and recover and come back into the collegiate world. So when you think about your time in college and the other students that you work with, what do you think is the hardest thing for them to balance when they if they're trying to stay sober and they're in college? What are some of the big challenges that they face that make it more difficult than the regular student?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first things that comes to mind for me is just the college and the party culture in general. A lot of times, if we did a random experiment and asked, 100 people to close their eyes and imagine just you say the word college and what do you think? There are probably images of drinking or drug use that would come to mind. So some of that kind of stigma and underlying perceived culture of what college is, I think is always something that comes to mind for me. I think also um, the normalization of a young individual not drinking or utilizing mind-altering substances. In the work that I do, and I'll admit I'm very close to it, right? But in the work that I do, I think we are moving the needle in the sense that students who are not in recovery, those that don't have a substance use disorder or an addictive disorder, are a little bit more understanding of what that looks like for an individual to be in recovery. But traditionally speaking, I think that there's always been the kind of thought that you go to college and you party and you have a good time, and then once you graduate, you grow up and you set aside your wayward ways and you kind of focus. So I certainly think that's a barrier. I also think that it's really important for when a college student returns to be able to balance their education and their recovery simultaneously, meaning that a lot of times collegiate recovery programs can serve as a second chance programs for students who, maybe have had to take a little bit of time off and want to come back. And as we are prone to do, we want to do it quickly and get back on track and get back on with our lives. And sometimes folks don't like hearing the message of, hey, instead of taking 7 classes and also trying to do X, Y, and Z, let's scale it back a little bit and do equal parts recovery, equal parts school. So those are some of the things to come to mind. But the most, I think one of the most meaningful aspects of collegiate recovery and what it provides is, we have the programming, we have the staff, we have all of the different events and that sort of thing. But just the community and the sense of not being alone, I think is absolutely critical, right? I think it's a lot more easy for a college student or a student who's in recovery to go to school to get lost in the shuffle if they don't have a group of people that know that they're in recovery, that can hold them accountable, that can check in with them, and vice versa. So I think that symbiotic relationship where students can arrive to a safe space and place, and people know their name and know who they are and what they're going through, and empathize and relate, and also provide that experience, strength, and hope is super critical for a student who's in recovery to maintain that and achieve a degree.
Yeah, one of the privileges that I've had is to attend your yearly scholarship breakfast and see who your students are. And one challenge that I think they face, and maybe kind of a perception that we need to change is, not all the kids that are or students that are in the collegiate recovery program are 18, 19 years old and just coming in as freshmen. A lot of them, like you did, took a pause in their career because they left and then they went to treatment. So there's a break in time. So not only are they balancing their college life and their academic life and their social life, but then there's a financial pressure on a number of them. So talk a little bit about kind of the range of students that might be in your program, because they could be a blend of just about anything and everything that would be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting question, especially with the landscape of the field and the way it is now. Traditionally speaking, at least speaking for when Kennesaw State started and for when my work started in Mississippi State, the average age of the student was more non-traditional. And for Kennesaw State's purposes, I think the average age was, don't quote me on this, was like 28, 29. It was a little bit older. But in recent years, it's actually been trending down some. So I think it's closer to 24 or 25 now. That to say, we still have a wide range of students. So we have students who are in their 30s and have families and are coming back to school and doing school part-time and working full-time. But something that I'm personally really encouraged by is seeing students that are coming in just immediately from high school and like 18, 19-year-old students who've found recovery early in life and are coming in as a traditional student. That to say, whether you come back to school when you're 30 or 50 or 70 or
Yeah.
18, I think is a beautiful thing. But I also think that speaks to the nature of addiction and recovery as we see it in our nation now, and individuals and young adults specifically finding recovery at an earlier age. Um, so that's the ages are trending down a little bit more, but at least for our purposes, our range is still fairly broad. Just to share a quick anecdote that kind of stood out to me. I met with a student recently and we were doing some recovery coaching, and he was kind of telling me his life story, and he'd found recovery when he was 14 years old, and like,
That's early.
yeah, 14, and like had gone to treatment and, like progressed through high school and then came to Kennesaw State because of the program that we have. And I found recovery when I was 19, but I was still just sitting there like, my God, 14, like you found it pretty early, like, so that's something that I certainly think is encouraging to see students getting at a younger age.
And I also think that speaks to the fact that statistics will tell us that most people that become addicted started using before they even left high school.
Mhm.
And so they're younger and younger. One of the things that I know that's specific to your program and probably is to others is that there's some level of preferential support when it comes to creating your academic schedule. So oftentimes, these students in recovery, again, they're having to balance family, work, and financial, so they need a little more help and flexibility. So talk about, if I were enrolling for this semester, how you might help them prioritize that academic schedule where maybe other students don't get that same level of support.
Sure. Um, and like you stated, a lot of other universities provide this service as well if there's a collegiate recovery program on campus. But for our students, the model that we have is recovery informed academic advising, which simply means we require our students to meet with the academic advisor of their college so they can get an understanding of the classes that they need to take in order to progress. And then once that's done, they meet with a staff member here, and we look at the class schedule that they have and then the recovery schedule that we offer, and we turn it upside down in the sense so that they can prioritize their recovery and the events that they need to attend here, and then fit their class schedule into that so that they don't have to choose between their recovery and their classes, and they can do both simultaneously. And then we do have priority registration that we are able to grant to our students so that they can get into the courses before they fill up in order to honor that balance of schedule. And a lot of collegiate recovery programs have a similar structure as well, where they're able to offer priority registration to help students set up their schedules accordingly.
And I think that's very valuable. So one of the things that you mentioned was that the importance of community. And when you look across the country, um, these programs are called CRCs, Collegiate Recovery Communities. And I'm sure people are thinking out there, well, gosh, there's AA and there's NA. How is this different? What's different about this level of community versus what you might get if you went to an AA or an NA meeting? So can you kind of compare and contrast some of the differences there?
Yeah. Absolutely. Feel that I'm well equipped to answer that question. Since when I returned to school,
Yeah.
it was school and a 12-step group and nothing in between. I think the the main difference is just for a student who would be walking into that environment is that the individuals who are part of a collegiate recovery community or a collegiate recovery program are also in school. So they can not only relate to that recovery piece, but they can relate to that educational piece as well. So for me, when I returned to school and I only had a 12-step program, most of the folks that I built a community around me with were just throttled that I was in school and also, in a 12-step program. And so to normalize that and build that community around folks is really wonderful. But beyond that of just nuts and bolts differentiating kind of factors between a 12-step program and a collegiate recovery program is since a collegiate recovery program is institutionally housed and has hopefully, namely a budget to be able to operate as such, we can kind of serve as a safe haven and provide so we can host peer-to-peer support meetings, whether it's AA or CA or all recovery or a yoga meeting or whatever that looks like. But then the other factors that come with it as well are kind of like I don't want to say the bells and whistles, right? But the other things that can assist the student in or outside the realms of a peer support program, right? So if that's scholarships or if that's a study space, if it's study hours, if it is different events or travel opportunities or mentorship opportunities that students can engage in. So I think the biggest differentiating piece is really that academic support. So they still get that recovery and that peer-to-peer support, depending on what the collegiate recovery program looks like and the culture and what meetings that they have or what pathways that they honor and support. But then all of the academic support is really what separates those two.
So following up on that, if you look at collegiate recovery communities across the nation, and you mentioned there's quite a few of them, the outcomes for the students are incredible. And actually, people that are in collegiate recovery programs tend to do better than the student population at large. So walk us through some
Yeah.
of the outcomes that have been documented. So, if a parent's thinking about that or students thinking about that, how might they, have a kind of a success quotient that they may not have otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I dive into the numbers, there's always this funny story I like to tell that kind of underscores why our students are the best and the brightest. And I'm absolutely partial. I know that. But when I was a student, we had our group and we had our cohort and we were all moving along. And then we had a student who was a freshman came in and, he was he was in recovery, but he was being a freshman and sleeping through classes and all this stuff. And so you kind of write some stuff off. And he's like, oh, but college, I'm whatever. And I'll never forget one of my friends turned to him and said, I'm not in college. Like, I am a student. I am here to get my degree. Like, this is not like a game for me. Like, I'm here for my academics. And so, that to say, individuals, students who are in collegiate recovery programs tend to be very dedicated to their academics and being successful, especially given that, oftentimes it's seen as a second chance for a lot of individuals who are returning. But at least for Kennesaw State's purposes, our institutional GPA on average is about like a 3.4, 3.5, just kind of depending on the semester and what the trends look like. And then from a retention perspective, our return to use rates are fairly low. So they're about 2.75%, which means that, out of if 100 people joined our collegiate recovery program and stayed with us through all the way through graduation, only about 2.75% of them would have a recurrence of use. And then our graduation rates are pretty phenomenal as well. So they're at about 70 or 80% is a general average just from a national standpoint that you can you can gather. So all of that to say, I think being a second chance program really motivates students to be successful and to take their academics seriously. And then I'm also a really firm believer that that collegiate recovery, or that recovery itself, and achieving a college degree have this beautiful parallel of if an individual enters into recovery, it's really to regain control of their life and develop a sense of agency and purpose, and right to be your own person and be able to have the power of choice and not be struggle with an addiction. And then when you look at a college degree, in my mind, it's about finding your purpose and your passion, what you want to do, and how you want to carry your talents into the world. And so when you combine that self-agency with finding what your purpose and passion is in college, and you put both of those together, it makes for a really resilient student and a really resilient, individual who will be one day a productive workforce member of society. But that to say, our retention, progression, and graduation rates, just from a national standard, trend much higher than the just general student population. And as I said, I think it's due to the fact that our students have a more motivating factors to take their study seriously.
Yeah, so, as you said, it's like their second chance. They get to reinvent themselves. Now, um, if I'm looking across the country, whether I'm in California, Texas, Ohio, wherever, and I want to explore a collegiate recovery community, what's the best way for someone, to find one? Where can they go see if that, Ohio State or Alabama or Texas has one? And then what's the process to engage? Like, is there an application process? And who would qualify and who would not be right for the program?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it were me, if I were doing this and I didn't know anything, I would want to know. I mean, I would do it by school, right? So I'd look at the universities that I was most interested in. And so a simple search of Kennesaw State University Collegiate Recovery Community would generally let me know whether or not there was a collegiate recovery program at that institution. There's also a larger national association that houses a majority of this information, called the Association of Recovery and Higher Education. And they have a website where you can explore whether or not a university does or doesn't provide collegiate recovery support services. But if you do just a rudimentary search of the school that you're interested in and add collegiate recovery, you should be able to suss that out. And if for some reason the university is not up to date with their websites and all of that stuff, which would never ever happen, never ever in a million years,
No.
it would never happen. But if that were the case, I would instruct or encourage people to reach out to either the dean of students office on that respective campus or their health and well-being clinic or area on that campus to see if there was a collegiate recovery program. Um, Most collegiate recovery programs have an application process in order to apply and be accepted into the program. It looks different for each and every individual school. There is some, general structure that one can expect, and just insofar as background history, information about where they're coming from, parent and contact information, emergency information, all of that good stuff. And at least what I share with folks is that it's not necessarily like you have to get a letter of recommendation, you're in or you're out, and we're really evaluating if you're going to be a part of our team, but more so a screening process to make sure that we're collecting as much information as we can about someone on the front end, and to be able to assist them in their journey and make sure that they are the right fit for us if they are choosing this school. That said, I'm a big believer in that I have no monopoly on collegiate recovery, and so if there's a student who's not interested in Kennesaw State, but if they're interested in Wyoming or Texas or Massachusetts or whatever that looks like, I'm happy to point people in that direction. I also think one thing that's unique to our field and special about our field is that if there is someone out there who's looking for a collegiate recovery program and they can't find one at their campus, but they find one at another campus, 10 times out of 10, if they get in touch with that administrator, that individual will know where the collegiate recovery programs are within the state or within the region, since we are a fairly smaller field and can kind of get people in touch with with the right places, which is, I guess, a beauty of having a smaller field within the world.
Well, what we want to do is make this smaller field grow bigger.
We
And
do.
one thing I mentioned earlier is that I had the privilege of coming to your scholarship breakfast. And so I think people need to understand that while you do receive some funding from the school, that external funding and support is also pretty critical to make sure that these programs work. I have the privilege of having a scholarship in my daughter's name that was funded by one of my dear friends that is very much one of your supporters. And also, I've seen corporations offer their support. So, talk about why scholarships and external funding would be critical to the success of collegiate recovery, and perhaps how people can support their colleges when they find a program that they like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at least for me, one of the biggest things that immediately came to mind, and that comes to mind for me, when I'm working on fundraising, specifically for Kennesaw State University, is sustainability, right? So if I can get some endowed funds or get funds that fund a program or an initiative or a scholarship or a student, it really is a demonstration to the university of which I'm working at, that there is something special here and that there are people who want to invest in the work that we're doing and want to see students grow and be successful. And I think there's a pretty big value add when it comes to that, because an investment in collegiate recovery, I mean, it's very niche, right? It's a college plus recovery, but the outcomes are fairly remarkable in the sense that whether it's a scholarship or otherwise, an individual who is interested in giving or supporting collegiate recovery can know that those funds are being put to good use, whether it's helping a student be able to, maintain their recovery, go to classes, and not have to work a full-time job, right? And kind of be able to get through that process. But at the end of the day, um, I think one of the biggest missions that we have as a field is to create workforce ready individuals who are ready to go out and make a positive impact in their community, whether it's recovery, whether it's technology, engineering, whatever that looks like. I think the value add is pretty big in the sense of investing in a future generation of individuals who can come into a workforce and make it a pretty, a more healthy and more productive environment. And I think that's just inherent in the values that we find in recovery, right? Um, if it were me, and a lot of times it is me, right? But if it were me and I'm looking at folks that I'd be interested in hiring, recovery versus not recovery, a lot of times recovery is just a huge value add, just knowing what it looks like of hiring someone who's been through a struggle, has come through the other side, has navigated that process, has seen that in their personal life, I think translates really well to a workplace environment, right, where you're always overcoming obstacles and challenges. And I think it makes that at a deep personal level, it's really healthy and helpful in the workforce.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that because I have hired people from your program and in recovery. And one thing that corporations need to do is kind of look past their standard paradigms, because oftentimes people that are in recovery, they've had disruptions in their career, their schooling. They may have had some situations, legal situations that they needed to overcome. And we have to like think beyond that, because I do agree with you. I find that people that have been through these programs are more resilient, they're more committed, they've had to overcome more obstacles, and all of those things are critically important when it comes to the workforce. So, Blake, as our time comes to an end, what would be one last piece of advice that you would like to give someone that is considering college and needs that extra support?
Oh, that's a good question to end on. If it were me, the one piece of advice that I would give is absolutely 100% make sure that the university that you're looking to attend has a collegiate recovery program. And then beyond that, ask important questions, right? Ask whether or not there's scholarships available. Ask what kind of meetings are available, if there's housing available, study hours, all the different things. I think um, it's an interesting thing, right? Because in addiction, we've we lost the power to choose, and we didn't have a choice. But when you're returning to college, I think that you can be a little bit choosy in finding a program that has, everything that you want to offer, whether it is the sports and the football experience and all the different stuff and the sober tailgates, or if it's more so the academic, study hours, study space, all of that good stuff. I think I would encourage folks to A, find a university that has support, and then B, ask the questions that makes the most sense to them, whether it's housing, whatever that looks like, to make sure that they find a university that will be a good fit for them and a program that will be a good fit for them. The last thing I'll say related to that, the question that I would ask if I were looking for a school to join and looking at a collegiate recovery program, I would ask, what's the community like? How strong is the community? How often are we getting together? Is it tight knit? Do I know the people's names who are in the community? Because for me, again, if I can go through this experience, I would 100 times out of 100 times choose to do it with folks that are like me, and as opposed to doing it alone. So yeah.
Well, all of that is great advice. So we've spent the last 30 minutes with Blake Schneider, who is the program director at Kennesaw State CYAAR program, Center for Youth and Addiction and Recovery. And I appreciate your help and advice, and hopefully this informs parents, people that are going to hire employees, and people that are in recovery, find better choices for college. So thanks again, and goodbye to everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, you're welcome.